See how long I can stay awake. Okay, we're taking up where we left off. We're just in the middle of whatever chapter you see on the title. As far as you know, there's no peculiar kink in any of the younger generation? Cedric's an eccentric type, one of those natural rebels. I wouldn't say he was perfectly normal, but you might say, who is? Harold's fairly orthodox, not what I call a very pleasant character, cold-hearted, eye to the main chance. Alfred's got a touch of the delinquent about him. He's a wrong 'un, always was. Saw him taking money out of a missionary box once that they used to keep in the hall. That kind of thing. Oh, well, the poor fellow's dead. I suppose I shouldn't be talking against him. What about... Craddock hesitated. Emma Crackenthorpe. Nice girl, quiet. One doesn't always know what she's thinking. Has her own plans and her own ideas, but she keeps them to herself. She's more character than you might think from her general appearance. Forgot the lipstick, oh well. You knew Edmund, I suppose, the son who was killed in France? Yes, he was the best of the bunch, I'd say. Good-hearted, gay, a nice boy. Did you ever hear that he was going to marry or had married a French girl just before he was killed? Dr. Morris frowned. It seems as though I remember something about it, he said, but it's a long time ago. Quite early on in the war, wasn't it? Yes. Well, I dare say he'd have lived to regret it if he had married a foreign wife. There's some reason to believe that he did do just that, said Craddock. In a few brief sentences he gave an account of recent happenings. I remember seeing something in the papers about a woman found in a sarcophagus. It was at Rutherford Hall. And there's reason to believe that the woman was Edmund Crackenthorpe's widow. Well, that seems extraordinary, more like a novel than real life. But who'd want to kill the poor thing? I mean, how does it tie up with arsenical poisoning in the Crackenthorpe family? In one of two ways, said Craddock, but they're both very far-fetched. Somebody, perhaps, is greedy and wants the whole of Josiah Crackenthorpe's fortune. Damn fool if he does, said Dr. Morris. He'll only have to pay the most stupendous taxes on the income from it. That was the end of 20, because now we're on 21. Nasty things, mushrooms, said Mrs. Kidder. Mrs. Kidder had made the same remark about 10 times in the last few days. Lucy did not reply. Never touch 'em myself, said Mrs. Kidder. Much too dangerous. It's a merciful providence as there's only been one death. The whole lot might have gone, and you too, miss. A wonderful escape you've had. It wasn't the mushrooms, said Lucy. They were perfectly all right. Don't you believe it, said Mrs. Kidder. Dangerous they are, mushrooms. One toadstool among the lot, and you've had it. Funny, went on Mrs. Kidder among the rattle of plates and dishes in the sink, how things seem to all come together, as it were. My sister's eldest had measles, and our Ernie fell down and broke his arm, and my husband came out all over with boils, all in the same week. You'd hardly believe it, would you? It's been the same thing here, went on Mrs. Kidder. First that nasty murder, and now Mr. Alfred dead with mushroom poisoning. Who'll be next, I'd like to know. Lucy felt rather uncomfortably that she would like to know, too. My husband, he doesn't like me coming here now, said Mrs. Kidder. Thinks it's unlucky, but what I say is I've known Miss Crackenthorpe a long time now, and she's a nice lady. And she depends on me, and I couldn't leave poor Miss Islesborough, I said, not to do everything herself in the house. Pretty hard it is on you, miss, all these trays. Lucy was forced to agree that life did seem to consist very largely of trays at the moment. She was at the moment arranging trays to take to the various invalids. As for them nurses, they never do a hand's turn, said Mrs. Kidder. All they want is pots and pots of tea made strong, and meals prepared. Wore out, that's what I am. She spoke in a tone of great satisfaction, though actually she had done very little more than her normal morning's work. Lucy said solemnly, "You never spare yourself, Mrs. Kidder." Mrs. Kidder looked pleased. Lucy picked up the first of the trays and started off up the stairs. "Who's this?" said Mr. Crackenthorpe disapprovingly. "Beef tea." What's this? What's this? "Beef tea and baked custard," said Lucy. "Take it away," said Mr. Crackenthorpe. "I won't touch that stuff. I told that nurse I wanted a beefsteak." "Dr. Quimper thinks you ought not to have beefsteak just yet," said Lucy. Mr. Crackenthorpe snorted. "I'm practically well again. I'm getting up tomorrow. How are the others?" "Mr. Harold's much better," said Lucy. "He's going back to London tomorrow." "Good riddance," said Mr. Crackenthorpe. "What about Cedric? Any hope he's going back to his island tomorrow?" "He won't be going just yet." "Pity. What's Emma doing? Why doesn't she come and see me?" "She's still in bed, Mr. Crackenthorpe." "Women always coddle themselves," said Mr. Crackenthorpe. "But you're a good strong girl," he added approvingly. "Run about all day, don't you?" "I get plenty of exercise," said Lucy. Old Mr. Crackenthorpe nodded his head approvingly. "You're a good strong girl," he said. "And don't think I've forgotten what I talked to you about before. One of these days you'll see what you'll see. Emma isn't always going to have things her own way, and don't listen to the others when they tell you I'm a mean old man. I'm careful of my money. I've got a nice little packet put by, and I know who I'm going to spend it on when the time comes." He leered at her affectionately. Lord. Lucy went rather quickly out of the room, avoiding his clutching hand. The next tray was taken into Emma. "Oh, thank you, Lucy. I'm really feeling quite myself again by now. I'm hungry, and that's a good sign, isn't it?" "My dear," went on Emma as Lucy settled the tray on her knees, "I'm really feeling very upset about your aunt. You haven't had any time to go see her, I suppose?" "No, I haven't, as a matter of fact. I'm afraid she must be missing you." "Oh, don't worry, Miss Crackenthorpe. She understands what a terrible time we've been through." "Have you rung her up?" "No, I haven't, just lately." "Well, do. Ring her up every day. It makes such a difference to old people to get news." "You're very kind," said Lucy. Her conscience smote her a little as she went down to fetch the next tray. The complications of illness in a house had kept her thoroughly absorbed, and she had had no time to think of anything else. She decided that she would ring up Miss Marple as soon as she had taken Cedric his meal. There was only one nurse in the house now as she passed Lucy on the landing, exchanging greetings. Cedric, looking incredibly tidied up and neat, was sitting up in bed, writing busily on sheets of paper. "Hello, Lucy," he said. "What hell brew have you got for me today? I wish you'd get rid of that god-awful nurse. She's simply too arch for words. Calls me we for some reason. And how are we this morning? Have we slept well? Oh dear, we're very naughty throwing off the bedclothes like that." He imitated the refined accents of the nurse in a high falsetto voice, which I didn't do. "You seem very cheerful," said Lucy. "What are you busy with?" "Plans," said Cedric. "Plans for what to do with this place when the old man pops off. It's a jolly good bit of land here, you know. I can't make up my mind whether I'd like to develop some of it myself, or whether I'll sell it in lots all in one go. Very valuable for industrial purposes. The house will do for a nursing home or a school. I'm not sure I shan't sell half the land and use the money to do something rather outrageous with the other half. What do you think?" "You haven't got it yet," said Lucy dryly. "I shall have it, though," said Cedric. "It's not divided up like the other stuff. I get it outright. And if I sell it for a good fat price, the money will be capital, not income. So I shan't have to pay taxes on it. Money to burn, think of it." "I always understood you rather despised money," said Lucy. "Of course I despise money when I haven't got any," said Cedric. "It's the only dignified thing to do. What a lovely girl you are, Lucy, or do I just think so because I haven't seen any good-looking women for such a long time?" "I expect that's it," said Lucy. "Still busy tidying everyone and everything up?" "Somebody seems to have been tidying you up," said Lucy, looking at him. "It's that damn nurse," said Cedric with feeling. "Have you had the inquest on Alfred yet? What happened?" "It was adjourned," said Lucy. "Police being cagey, this mass poisoning does give one a bit of a turn, doesn't it? Mentally, I mean. I'm not referring to more obvious aspects." He added, "Better look after yourself, my girl." "I do," said Lucy. "Has young Alexander gone back to school yet?" "I think he's still with the Stoddard West. I think it's the day after tomorrow that school begins." Before getting her own lunch, Lucy went to the telephone and rang up Miss Marple. "I'm so terribly sorry I haven't been able to come over, but I've been really busy." "Of course, my dear, of course. Besides, there's nothing that can be done just now. We just have to wait." "Yes, but what are we waiting for?" "Elspeth McGillicuddy ought to be home very soon now," said Miss Marple. "I wrote to her to fly home at once. I said it was her duty, so don't worry too much, my dear." Her voice was kindly and reassuring. "You don't think," Lucy began but stopped, "that there will be any more deaths?" "Oh, I hope not, my dear, but one never knows, does one? When anyone is really wicked, I mean, and I think there's great wickedness here, or madness," said Lucy. "Of course I know that there's the modern way of looking at things. That is the modern way. I don't agree myself." Lucy rang off, went into the kitchen, and picked up her tray of lunch. Mrs. Kidder had divested herself of her apron and was about to leave. "You'll be all right, miss, I hope?" she asked solicitously. "Of course I shall be all right," snapped Lucy. She took her tray not into the big gloomy dining room, but into a small study. She was just finishing her meal when the door opened and Brian Eastley came in. "Hello," said Lucy. "This is very unexpected." "I suppose it is," said Brian. "How is everybody?" "Oh, much better. Harold's going back to London tomorrow." "What do you think about it all? Was it really arsenic?" "It was arsenic, all right," said Lucy. "It hasn't been in the papers yet." "No, I think the police are keeping it up their sleeves for the moment." "Somebody must have a pretty good down on the family," said Brian. "Who's likely to have sneaked in and tampered with the food?" "I suppose I'm the most likely person, really," said Lucy. Brian looked at her anxiously. "But you didn't, did you?" he asked. He sounded slightly shocked. "No, I didn't," said Lucy. "Nobody could have tampered with the curry. She had made it alone in the kitchen and brought it to table, and the only person who could have tampered with it was one of the 5 people who sat down to the meal." "I mean, why should you?" said Brian. They're nothing to you, are they, I say?" He added, "I hope you don't mind my coming back here like this." No, of course I don't. Have you come to stay?" "Well, I'd like to, if it wouldn't be an awful bore to you." No, we can manage. You see, I'm out of a job at the moment, and I get rather fed up. Are you really sure you don't mind?" "Oh, I'm not the person to mind, anyway. It's Emma." "Oh, Emma's all right," said Brian. "Emma's always been very nice to me, in her own way, you know. She keeps things to herself a lot. In fact, she's rather a dark horse, old Emma. This living here and look after the old man would get most people down. Pity she never married. Too late now, I suppose." I don't think it's too late at all, said Lucy. Well, Brian considered a clergyman, perhaps, he said hopefully. She'd be useful in the parish and tactful with the Mothers' Union. I do mean the Mothers' Union, don't I? Not that I know what it really is, but you come across it sometimes in books. And she'd wear a hat in church on Sundays, he added. Doesn't sound much of a prospect to me, said Lucy, rising and picking up the tray. I'll do that, said Brian, taking the tray from her. Then they went into the kitchen together. Shall I help you wash up? I do like this kitchen, he added. In fact, I know it isn't the sort of thing that people do like nowadays, but I like this whole house. Shocking taste, I suppose, but there it is. You could land a plane quite easily in the park, he added with enthusiasm. I think she's going to get together with him and they'll end up with a house. Maybe. Seems a waste it's coming to Cedric, he remarked. First thing he'll do is sell the whole thing and go breaking off abroad again. Can't see myself why England isn't good enough for anybody. Harold wouldn't want this house either, and of course it's much too big for Emma. Now, if only it came to Alexander. He and I would be as happy together here as a couple of sandboys. Of course, it would be nice to have a woman about the house. He looked thoughtfully at Lucy. Oh, well, what's the good of talking? If Alexander were to get this place, it would mean the whole lot of them would have to die first, and that's not really likely, is it? Though, from what I've seen of the old boy, he might easily live to be 100 just to annoy them all. I don't suppose he was much cut up by Alfred's death, was he? Lucy said shortly, no, he wasn't. Cantankerous old devil, said Brian Eastley cheerfully. And that's all at 21. That was fast. Let's see how long this next chapter is. It's fairly short. I'll try. 22. Dreadful the things people go about saying, said Mrs. Kidder. I don't listen, mind you, more than I can help, but you'd hardly believe it. She waited hopefully. Yes, I suppose so, said Lucy. About that body that was found in the long barn, went on Mrs. Kidder, moving crab-like backwards on her hands and knees as she scrubbed the kitchen floor, saying as how she'd been Mr. Edmund's fancy piece during the war, and how she come over here and a jealous husband followed her and did her in. It is a likely thing a foreigner would do, but it wouldn't be likely after all these years, would it? It sounds most unlikely to me, but there's worse things than that, they say, said Mrs. Kidder. Say anything, people will. You'd be surprised. There's those that say Mr. Harold married somewhere abroad and that she come over and found out he's committed bigamy with that lady Alice, and that she was going to bring him to court, and that he met her down here and did her in and hid her body in the sarcophagus. Did you ever? Shocking, said Lucy vaguely, her mind elsewhere. Of course I didn't listen, said Mrs. Kidder virtuously. I wouldn't put no stock in such tales myself. It beats me how people think up such things, let alone say them. All I hope is none of it gets to Miss Emma's ears. It might upset her, and I wouldn't like that. She's a very nice lady, Miss Emma is, and I've not heard a word against her, not a word. And of course, Mr. Alfred being dead, nobody says anything against him. Not even that it's a judgment, which they might do, but it's awful, miss, isn't it? The wicked talk there is. Mrs. Kidder spoke with immense enjoyment. "It must be quite painful for you to listen to it," said Lucy. "Oh, it is," said Mrs. Kidder. "It is indeed. I says to my husband, I says, 'However can they?'" The bell rang. "There's the doctor, miss. Will you let him in, or shall I?" "I'll go," said Lucy. But it was not the doctor. On the doorstep stood a tall, elegant woman in a mink coat. Drawn up to the gravel sweep was a purring Rolls with a chauffeur at the wheel. "Can I see Miss Emma Crackenthorpe, please?" It was an attractive voice, the R's slightly blurred. The woman was attractive, too, about 35, with dark hair and expensively and beautifully made up. "I'm sorry," said Lucy. "Miss Crackenthorpe is ill in bed and can't see anyone." "I know she has been ill. Yes, it's very important that I should see her." "I'm afraid," Lucy began. The visitor interrupted her. I think you're Miss Islesborough, are you not?" She smiled an attractive smile. "My son has spoken of you, so I know. I'm Lady Stoddard West, and Alexander is staying with me now." "Oh, I see," said Lucy. Emma was sitting up in bed. A soft pink shawl was round her shoulders and brought out the faint rose pink of her cheeks. Her dark hair had been neatly brushed and combed by nurse. Lucy had placed a bowl of autumn leaves on the dressing table the day before. Her room looked attractive and quite unlike a sick room. "I'm really quite well enough to get up," said Emma. "Dr. Quimper said I could tomorrow." "You look really quite yourself again," said Lucy. "Shall I bring Lady Stoddard West up?" "Yes, do." Lucy went downstairs again. "Will you come up to Miss Crackenthorpe's room?" She escorted her visitor upstairs, opened the door for her to pass in, and then shut it. Lady Stoddard West approached the bed with outstretched hand. "Miss Crackenthorpe, I really do apologize for breaking in on you like this. I've seen you, I think, at the sports at the school." "Yes," said Emma, "I remember you quite well. Do sit down." In the chair conveniently placed by the bed, Lady Stoddard West sat down. She said it in a quiet, low voice. "You must think it very strange of me coming here like this. But I have reason. I think it's an important reason. You see, the boys have been telling me things. You can understand that they were very excited about the murder that happened here. I confess I did not like it at the time. I was nervous. I wanted to bring James home at once. But my husband laughed. He said that obviously it was a murder that had nothing to do with the house and the family, and said that from what he remembered from his boyhood and from James's letters, both he and Alexander were enjoying themselves so wildly that it would be sheer cruelty to bring them back. So I gave in and agreed they should stay on until the time arranged for James to bring Alexander back with him." Emma said, "You think we ought to have sent your son home earlier?" "No, that's not what I mean at all. Oh, it's difficult for me, this, but what I have to say must be said. You see, they've picked up a good deal, the boys. They told me that this woman, the murdered woman, that the police have an idea that she may be a French girl, whom your eldest brother, she may be a French girl." Did I just say that? "Have an idea she may be a French girl whom your eldest brother, who was killed in the war, knew in France." "That is so?" It's a possibility, said Emma, her voice breaking slightly, that we are forced to consider it may have been so. There's some reason for believing that the body is that of this girl, this Martine. I've told you it's a possibility. But why? Why should they think that she was Martine? Did she have letters on her, papers? No, nothing of that kind, but you see, I had a letter from this Martine. You had a letter from Martine? Yes, a letter telling me she was in England and would like to come and see me. I invited her down here, but got a telegram saying that she was going back to France. Perhaps she did go back to France. We don't know, but since then, an envelope was found here addressed to her. That seems to show that she had come down here, but I really don't see. She broke off. Lady Stoddard West broke in quickly. You really do not see what concern it is of mine? That is very true. I should not, in your place. But when I heard this, or rather a garbled account of this, I had to come to make sure it was really so, because if it is, yes, said Emma, then I must tell you something that I had never intended to tell you. You see, I am Martine Dubois. Wow. I gotta go back and look. So this lady just came in and I don't know. Emma stared at her guest as though she could hardly take in the sense of her words. You? She said. You are Martine? The other nodded vigorously. But yes, it surprises you, I'm sure. But it is true. I met your brother Edmund in the first days of the war. He was indeed billeted at our house. Well, you know the rest. We fell in love. We intended to be married. And then there was the retreat to Dunkirk. Edmund was reported missing. Later he was reported killed. I will not speak to you of that time. It was long ago and it is over. But I will say to you that I loved your brother very much. Then came the grim realities of war. The Germans occupied France. I became a worker for the resistance. I was one of those who was assigned to pass Englishmen through France to England. It was in that way I met my present husband. He was an Air Force officer, parachuted into France to do special work. When the war ended, we were married. I considered once or twice whether I should write to you or come and see you, but I decided against it. It could do no good, I thought, to take up old memories. I had a new life, and I had no wish to recall the old. She paused and then said, but it gave me, I will tell you, a strange pleasure when I found out that my son James' greatest friend at his school was a boy whom I found to be Edmund's nephew. Alexander, I may say, is very much like Edmund, as I dare say you yourself appreciate. It seemed to me a very happy state of affairs, said James and Alexander. And Alexander should be such... Oh, wait a minute. It seemed to me a very happy state of affairs that James and Alexander should be such friends. She leaned forward and placed her hand on Emma's arm. But you see, dear Emma, do you not, that when I heard this story about the murder, about this dead woman being suspected to be the Martine that Edmund had known, that I had to come and and come and tell you the truth. Either you or I must inform the police of the fact. Whoever the dead woman is, she's not Martine." "I can hardly take it in," said Emma, "that you should be the Martine that dear Edmund wrote to me about." She sighed, shaking her head, then she frowned perplexedly. "But I don't understand. Was it you, then, who wrote to me?" Lady Stoddard West shook a vigorous head. "No, of course I did not write to you." "Then," Emma stopped, "then there was someone pretending to be Martine who wanted perhaps to get money out of you?" "That is what it must have been, but who can it be?" Emma said slowly, "I suppose there were people at the time who knew." The other shrugged her shoulders. "Probably, yes, but there was no one intimate with me. No, not one very close to me. I have never spoken of it since I came to England, and why wait all this time? It is curious, very curious." Emma said, "I don't understand it. We'll have to see what Inspector Craddock has to say." She looked with suddenly softened eyes at her visitor. "I was so glad to know you at last, my dear." "And I you. Edmund spoke of you very often. He was very fond of you. I'm happy in my new life, but all the same, I don't quite forget." Emma leaned back and heaved a sigh. "It's a terrible relief," she said. "As long as we feared that the dead woman might be Martine, it seemed to be tied up with the family. But now, oh, it's an absolute load off my back. I don't know who the poor soul was, but she can't have had anything to do with us." And that was the end of 22. Wow. Yay! Finally read over 30 minutes. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So we'll be on 23 when next we read. Yay! Stayed awake. And it's all going on 11 o'clock at night. Love y'all. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. Bye-bye.